Labour left, Labour right, or Labour's centre. In 2019, we all lost together. Or that is the message of a new report out by Labour Together, which me and Aaron Bastani are going to present and analyse, interrogate today. How are you doing, Aaron?
I'm good, Michael. How are you doing?
Very well. I'm having a sort of a nightmare with various bits of technology. I'm going to have to try and navigate that during the lockdown tomorrow, but we're all good otherwise. We're also we've got some great stories tonight. We're going to talk about whether or not the Tories are actually ignorant about the names of footballers and the origins of taking knees, or whether or not they are, I suppose, trolling Britain's ethnic minority communities to try and prolong a culture war which will ultimately benefit them. And we're also going to talk about Alan Sugar and obviously the latest on coronavirus. As ever, make sure you share the show link and tweet on the hashtag TiskiSour. In the wake of Labour's 2019 general election defeat, the pressure group Labour Together set up a commission to look into the causes of that defeat. That commission sought to represent the span of the party, so it included former leader Ed Miliband, James Meadway, friend of the show and ex-advisor to Shadow Chancellor John McDonnell, and MPs such as Lucy Powell and Shabana Mahmood. They drew on 11,000 survey responses, submissions from groups like Momentum and Progress, polling data and focus groups to analyse what went wrong, and also how Labour can win in 2024. And the results, by my reckoning, all seem fairly uncontroversial, really. They're saying that the short-term reasons we lost the general election were Brexit, Jeremy Corbyn, and flabby manifesto, or the unpopularity of Jeremy Corbyn. And they say this all fits within a broader, longer-term decline of Labour among socially conservative workers or socially conservative voters. A lot of them are quite old now, stopped working a while ago. Not all of the people that left the party, sorry. My apologies. And it painted a picture of a fairly dysfunctional party. So obviously there, the conclusion it came to was let's have less division and become a bit more professional. In general, we're going to go through what I think are sort of some of the most interesting factoids that come out of the report. But first of all, Aaron, your general impression?
Yeah, I thought it was measured. It's almost like there's been a trade-off here. People aren't going to go all in and blame Brexit if the other side don't go all in and blame Jeremy Corbyn. And I suspect in terms of negotiating more macro political framing of this, that's basically what's happened. I don't know, but that's what it looks like. They've not really stuck the knife when it comes to Corbyn. And at the same time, people haven't gone, haha, you were wrong about a second referendum. And I think we'll never know, conclusively the difference not pursuing that position on a second referendum would have made. But as we'll talk about over the rest of this show, there is pretty substantial data here to indicate Labour would have done better not adopting a second referendum. Not that they would have won the election, not that they would have formed a government, but they probably would have done better. But that's something we can discuss in a minute.
I mean, my opinion on all of this is that it was overdetermined. I think there were three sufficient conditions for Labour losing an election, which was the unpopularity of the leader, a Brexit position. No one wanted us, or not enough people wanted a second referendum, and flabby manifesto. I feel like we lost all discipline in 2019. But in any case, let's go through some of the.
When you say the flabby manifesto, because people always say the flabby manifesto, but I mean, manifestos have to be drawn up by a particular kind of meeting, which only happens once an election's called. Do you think that Labour should change the process in regards to manifesto writing? Because I mean, it's very much an ad hoc, spontaneous thing. And in 2017, that worked out great, And I think you're right. In 2019, it did the complete opposite. But they were both kind of occasion pieces. I do wonder, sort of, if you want to form a government, it seems a weird way to sort of write your program for running the country. Just, there's one meeting 2 months before an election. I think it's kind of odd. But
well, I mean, I suppose. I think that's probably making excuses for the leadership, because I think probably under previous leaders, yes, you have got to get the consensus of various people in that meetings. But if you go there with a clear vision and you say, let's not have too much detail in there, I think you'll probably get agreement on that. But we're going to go through some of the details, some of the interesting factoids. Let's go to our first graphic. So compared with 2017, in net terms, Labour lost around 1.7 million Leave voters and around 1 million Remain voters. We also failed to attract swing voters, winning over far fewer swing voters than at any recent election. In 2019, the Conservatives were more successful than Labour in turning out non-voters. They overtook Labour among 2017 non-voters, gaining 2 million non-voters to Labour's 1.8 million. These votes for Labour were offset by the abstention of 1.8 million 2017 supporters who did not vote in 2019. So, I mean, the conclusion there is kind of Labour lost among everyone, significant numbers among Remainers, significant numbers among Leavers. I imagine, Aaron, you're right to sort of say, I saw you say on Twitter today that, those Leavers that we lost were more significant in terms of number of seats because they, overwhelmingly or disproportionately live in marginals. But that non-voter statistic, that's the first time I've seen that. So I found that quite, interesting that Labour under Corbyn, the strategy was always, let's not focus on the few swing voters in Britain's marginals, but let's create an avalanche of non-voters, which in 2017 did seem to work in our favour, but in 2019 didn't. What do you make of that?
Yeah, it's fascinating, isn't it? We always said, if for Corbynism to do anything, there has to be a big increase in turnout, which is what happened 2017. It wasn't massive, but it was a pretty big increase in turnout. And what's interesting is actually, I mean, it wasn't that long ago, I'm sure many of our viewers remember it. Actually, in the final weeks before voter registration deadline, we were having record numbers of people registering to vote. So Labour did that thing well. The question is, why wouldn't you do that a year in advance rather than 2 weeks in advance? It's something I repeatedly asked people who were around the sort of Labour leadership in 2018, 2017, 2019. I said, why aren't you getting young people to register to vote now? I said the same thing to Momentum. And they said, no, it's something we'll do. We'll have a bit of exit velocity. If you do it towards the end, when there's a deadline, more people will do it. That never really made sense to me. And it does feed into a real intuition, which I think is confirmed in this document, which says that Labour really rested on their laurels. The presumption always was, if we get turnout up, if we can get people who weren't registered to come out and vote, we'll win. And actually, the experience of the 2016 Brexit referendum said that's not necessarily true. There were many, many people who voted in that referendum who didn't vote in the previous general election, who hadn't voted actually in the election before that even, and they came out to vote for Brexit. And I think a lot of people, again, missed that last year, primarily because, let's be real, London-based commentators didn't want to leave the European Union. And so the very idea that people who wouldn't otherwise vote would vote Tory just to leave the EU, again, it was just completely glanced over. And because all the sort of most deplorable people in British politics were saying it, Nigel Farage, some people in the Brexit Party, etc., Isabel Oakeshott, because those people were saying it, doesn't make it any less true. And like I say, that was the example of where that had held in 2016. It was just completely obviated. It was completely ignored by the left in conversations around whether or not a second referendum should be the position of the party. In this instance, fatal. The one thing, even though Labour got 32%, if you would have said, what one thing can you say with, as a cast iron guarantee that happened, which is a good news story for Labour, I would have said Labour managed to get more previous non-voters to vote for them than the Tories. I would have said that, hands down. Turns out wasn't true. Why? Brexit.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that is, I suppose it's obvious. I kind of thought that was potentially going to happen at the time, because I mean, what you had is people who went out for the first time in a while to vote in the 2016 general election, then in 2017 felt, well, we've got Brexit done.
Yeah.
We don't have that much skin in the game when it comes to Labour versus the Conservatives, so why bother now? 2019. That's because in 2017 the Tories hadn't, done a rerun of the referendum, and in 2019 they did, and it was a very successful strategy. They
didn't like Theresa May. They weren't going to vote for her. They didn't like Jeremy Corbyn. They weren't going to vote for him. But Brexit was happening. Why bother? Completely right. And we should have known this, not just on the back of the 2016 referendum, but the 2019 European elections. But again, the Brexit Party, they got the equal top number of MEPs in the European elections of any political party in Europe. And yet there were still sort of people on Twitter saying, well, the Remain vote's larger than the Leave vote. I mean, what more do you need? A political party's come out of nowhere in 4 months, and they've got the record number of MEPs in the European Parliament. I mean, all the signals were there, and I think just they were too wishfully ignored by too many people. That's not to say I'm putting this on Remainers. I'm not. There are many, many things on Jeremy. I think Jeremy Corbyn and the team around him could have stopped all of this by having a very firm position, say on a Norway Plus style deal straight after 2017. They could have stopped all of this. But what I am saying is, for those siren voices last year who said that, oh, well, if we adopt a second referendum position, we will definitively pick up votes. That was never the case. That was always highly, highly unlikely. Now, if somebody says, I thought we should adopt a second referendum because it's the right thing to do, well, that's your prerogative. We live in a democracy. You thought that was the right policy to adopt. Great. We can disagree over that. But when people said it's going to be a vote winner, Labour will get a majority because of it, it was cloud cuckoo land.
Next graphic. This one's on Corbyn. Stop Jeremy Corbyn was a major driver of the Conservatives' success across their key groups, including previous non-voters, and among all the swing voters Labour lost to the Tories. There's not much to say about that in a way, is there? I don't think that's going to be a surprise to anyone. The debate really is why he ended up being so unpopular, right? So, the fact that Jeremy Corbyn going into that general election had historically poor personal approval ratings, and the fact that that mattered, I don't think is really disputed. It's whether or not that was self-inflicted wounds, or whether or not that was the result of 4 years or 5 years of attacks from his own party and smears from newspapers. So I don't know. What do you think about that one, Aaron?
Bit of both, isn't it? But, we've seen in some polling since then, Labour are doing much better. They look more competent. Keir Starmer looks more authoritative. I think Keir Starmer's better at doing this, no doubt about it. But it doesn't hurt that you've got your entire parliamentary party basically on side. I do think it's probably impossible to become prime minister with a party as divided as Labour's was in 2019. It's probably impossible. Even if you had Niccolo Machiavelli mixed with Rosa Luxemburg and Vladimir Ilyich Lenin, I think, division, and so publicly expressed so frequently by one's MPs, I think that's just synonymous with incompetence for the electorate. So it was always going to be very, 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 very difficult. Jeremy Corbyn could have done much better. I'm not making any sort of apologies for him. But I think it's always hard when you've got a divided party, and Keir Starmer doesn't have that. And that's not an attack on him. Good for him. He's going to need it. For Labour to have any chance of even getting a hung parliament, I don't think they can get a majority anytime soon, simply because of what's going on in Scotland. But even for a hung parliament, they need incredible discipline amongst their MPs. And in a way, I think, the only way Labour ever could have done that is if Jeremy Corbyn had imposed a mandatory selection. That's the only way Labour were ever going to have a disciplined party. It was a basic political calculation. And at the end of the day, Jeremy Corbyn, the people around him, various trade unions, John McDonnell, many good friends of ours, they said, we don't need mandatory selection, we need party unity. My reply to them was always, you won't get party unity without mandatory selection. They didn't take their opportunity, and we are where we are.
Next one is organisational. This is an interesting one. So let's get this up. There were multiple power centres with no clear chain of command, including an executive director of campaigns, leader's office, party chair, general secretary, national coordinators, with no single person setting the strategy. Which, I think that's a big contrast to also how the Conservatives run general election campaigns. So I remember hearing this in terms of the David Cameron campaign, where he asked Lynton Crosby if he'll work on it, and Lynton Crosby says yes, but only if I have the final say on the whole campaign the whole time. And it seems like Isaac Levido, who works for Lynton Crosby's company, had a similar role in 2019. So you have very much someone who is in charge, who has a vision of the whole organization and the strategy, so you know what's going to happen as the days goes on, and also you can have a degree of flexibility. Whereas in the Labour Party, there was so much divided power. No one knew who was in charge. Yeah. And also it sort of brings up in the report, which I thought was quite interesting. Because of that, you ended up having a very inflexible grid. So you would have the Labour Party, who had agreed at the beginning of the election that they were going to announce this policy on that day, this policy on that day, this policy on that day. And regardless of what was in the news cycle, they would just announce it. So often they would push bad news stories for the Tories out of the news with a new big policy that they had. Yeah.
Politics 101. But what's really interesting, I suppose, is, in their defense, they had that relevance, recency bias rather, right? So you think something will happen because this thing happened really recently. Just like if you walk down a street 1,000 times and somebody doesn't hit you, and then last week you walk down a street and somebody hits you, you think the next time you walk down a street somebody's going to hit you. Highly unlikely. In the case of the 2019 general election, they said with some justification. Well, this is what we did in 2017. And the dynamics in 2017 were very, very different. I mean, one reason why, no element of surprise. I think it's fair to say the media treated, particularly broadcast, treated Labour very differently this time around. Actually, I thought they dealt with them very fairly in 2017. Theresa May was an appalling. I don't think Johnson did a great job in 2019, but Theresa May was appalling in 2017. So I just feel like they were fighting a completely different campaign. And, you know, people were going to seats that Labour were going to struggle to win. You think of all the great MPs that lost in marginals, you know, Laura Pidcock, Laura Smith, they almost lost Ian Lavery. So I think 700 votes in it. Just crazy. And yet you're sending thousands and thousands of people to Chingford. You know, it would have been great for Pfizer to win. She could have won. But we saw the national polling. We saw that red wall, you know, 5% in a lot of those seats, it would have kept Labour in, which is a good thing for Keir Starmer, right? It's not like those have gone forever. Equally, they could go further Tory next time round. So that does suggest there was no real strategy. You know, well, we were told to be defensive in 2017. We said to the political establishment, which was then controlled by the right within the party, fuck you, screw yourselves. And we were right. And I think they did the same this time around. That probably cost 10, 20 seats, right? I mean, at least let's say 10 seats. The fact that resources weren't being diverted to these places probably as effectively as they could have been. I
think that recency bias is a good... It's an interesting angle, actually, because something that the report raises, which again I think is quite a good point, is that in 2017 the Conservatives won the election, but you know they came so close to losing that they had a complete reassessment of their strategy, got everything in order, ended up having a very slick social media campaign. We did unexpectedly well, got a little bit complacent and thought, let's do the whole thing again. So we ended up facing a much more competent operation on their side, whilst not having evolved on our one.
And I think the biggest sort of instance of this is with Facebook. You know, the algorithm around Facebook basically changed right after the general election, not because of the general election, but basically by autumn 2017, it was clear that what was going viral was changing. Now, things still go viral on Facebook. You know, Double Down News put out a video recently, got 50,000 shares, but it's very different kinds of content. And in 2017, I think, you know, maybe 8 of the top 10 stories by shares on Facebook were Evolve, Canary, The Independent did supremely well. That content kind of didn't do so well under the new algorithm. I remember thinking this in late 2018. You know, Facebook was a game changer in 2017. You know, it can't be overemphasized. You know, the average person in the UK spends like, I don't know, 35 minutes. I don't know, because it's changing now because only boomers use it, generally speaking, but they spend significant amounts of time on Facebook. It's their leading source of political news content, more than you know, the newspapers. It tends to be kind of equal with broadcast now, although in many ways, often you can't delimit broadcast from social media because you're getting like the reproduction of various broadcast clips on Facebook and Twitter and so on. And the strategies hadn't been amended. And, you know, I did ask that question again multiple times to people. I never really got an answer. And why? You know, why? I don't get it. Now, if you do that, if you're ignoring all that stuff, but you're working on internal party discipline, getting in open selections, changing the composition of the party, I can understand. You know, you might agree or disagree, but it's explicable. I think in this instance, it's completely inexplicable. I have no idea why it didn't happen. And that's why, to me, when people attack, you know, the right, and, you know, the right, obviously Labour MPs, as we've said, divided parties don't win. You know, if people like Jess Phillips wanted to be members of a government, when your party's polling 40%, don't attack it. But forget that. You know, I think really the left has to take this on the chin. The leadership has to take this on the chin. It was really asleep at the wheel. It wasted 2 years. It really wasted 2 years. And the kind of, you know, the apogee, the apotheosis of this is Labour Live. You know, at the moment you should have been doing an event in the Red Wall, talking to people. You were doing an event in London with activists who'd already got behind you, already supported you, who didn't need to be won over. And big resources and big political capital was expended on doing that. Why? Who made that call?
Well, what they were trying to do was relive the glory days, right? So it wasn't saying who did we not win in 2017. It was like, let's have that magic again. And the magic obviously was it was trying to recreate that moment at Glastonbury where people were chanting, "Oh, Jeremy Corbyn." So like, let's put on our own festival.
Well, I mean, it's partly that, but I think it boils down to who was in charge. I think people were making various decisions, and there wasn't necessarily a centralized plan going on there. I agree that was probably the emotional kind of impetus behind it, why it happened. But you know, again, Where was the sign off? What were to sound wonky, but where were the measurables and so on? And you can like or dislike Keir Starmer, but you can be sure those are the sorts of questions that they'll now be asking.
Let's look at, they also talk about the long-term trends. We'll move on to our next story quite soon, but let's get up this graphic on the long-term trends that damaged Labour. So 4 in 10 of those who voted Labour in 2010 and went on to vote Leave in 2016 had already defected from Labour by the time of the 2015 election. In 2019, 25% more of this group were lost, leaving Labour with only a third of its 2010 Leave-minded voters. So, I mean, the point being made there is this problem does predate Brexit. All of those seats that collapsed in the red wall, it wasn't that there was a huge shift away from Labour there. It was that there was a small shift, which was enough to completely nudge the party over the edge and turn much of the red wall blue. Let's go to the conclusions, actually, straight away, and then I'll give Aaron a comment on both of those points. And these are the conclusions the report comes to. So Labour must be the agents of change and the party of the big economic change for the whole country and every part of it, reaching places and people who have been held back. The change Labour offers must be rooted in people's lives, showing that we have understood and are acting upon hopes and concerns of voters we have lost, and relevant to the places people live. Understanding place and developing a politics embedded in understanding of communities will be a vital component of this. The public need to know Labour's leadership is credible and can be trusted and is up to the task of governing. And I suppose what I'll put to you, Aaron, is that reading this, there are a few nuggets of information that were sort of interesting and I learned something from, but most of it was fairly uncontroversial. It's mainly a collection of stuff that we already knew. Those suggestions there aren't really going to break new ground when it comes to the Labour Party. But what I was pleasantly, I suppose, surprised by or encouraged by was that it does seem to be an attempt to create a new consensus in the Labour Party of where we're at, and it is the kind that seems like it's trying to push Keir Starmer towards that vision of let's have a big tent and go for try and play down the culture war, have a transformational economic vision, be a bit more competent. It doesn't seem like, and it seems probably actually an attempt to foreclose the desire by many in the PLP, and I think probably from how they've acted so far, some people in Keir Starmer's team, which is basically to say, let's forget the whole last 5 years. What we need is another rehashed version of Blairism. We need to piss off the left to impress people across the country. I mean, what do you make of it? Is that how you read this? Is that your read on this report and what it's attempting to do?
I think that's a very good conclusion about what it's trying to do and what it's done and what it says. But I would also add, it doesn't matter how you can write all these, you can say we need to devolve power and give power to people and we need to look credible and we can govern. If you've got 2/3 of your party constantly undermining your leader, it could be Keir Starmer, it could be Tony Blair, it could be Tony Benn, it could be Jeremy Corbyn, it doesn't matter. You won't win a general election. You won't win a general election. And so I'm not saying that's the reason why Labour didn't win. I'm not saying they're to blame for what happened in 2019. What I'm saying is that's all well and good. I agree with all of it. But if you have the level of enmity to a leader, an elected leader, twice elected leader, that Jeremy Corbyn was subject to for 4 or 5 years, Labour won't win. And I say that because it goes beyond just Jeremy Corbyn. The last 4 Labour leaders have effectively been usurped by the parliamentary party, or the parliamentary party has consistently tried to undermine them to the press and so on. You saw it with Tony Blair. Tony Blair was kind of removed in a palace coup involving Tom Watson of all people in 2007. Gordon Brown was subject to a coup in 2009. James Purnell, David Miliband, never kind of happened, and they were right to have those impulses because, of course, Labour then got 28.5% in the following year's general election. Then you have Ed Miliband. He's constantly undermined by elements within his own party. And then we have Jeremy Corbyn. So it's a really important lesson for Keir Starmer is, discipline at all costs. Discipline at all costs. And it's not impossible to do democracy and discipline. You can do it. Maybe we'll talk about a story a bit later on, which sort of perhaps points us towards that happening. Touch wood.
Although I suppose actually this is you might want to get that story out now.
Yeah, so it's about the fact that there are a number of people named in the recently leaked Labour report who've now been suspended. They've been suspended probably for around a month. I got eyes on a document a couple of weeks ago which indicated this. As I understand it, we're looking at 7 people And they're not all necessarily people who are named as doing things undermining the complaints process and so on. I think maybe some of them are also those who leaked it. I can't confirm that for sure, but that's what I'm sort of aware of at the moment. Ian McNichol is not among those 7 people who've been suspended, but in defence of Ian McNichol, there's no real smoking gun in the documents that we've seen. Other people, however, quite high-ranking people, have been suspended.
Interesting. Yeah,
and they are lawyered up. So maybe, well, I haven't heard about it for ages. Why didn't Keir Starmer tell people? You know, I'm on the left, right? I want to hold Keir Starmer's feet to the fire. But if you've got lawyers coming after you, the Labour Party is not going to divulge that information, and that's why it's been so late coming. You know, this was basically happening a month ago, and there were letters being sent from the people who were suspended, basically saying, you know, if this gets out, it's defamatory and so on. So interesting, but things are happening and steps are being taken. I think that, along with today's report, it's kind of good news. You know, I think, like you say, it does kind of suggest that the last 5 years aren't just going to be written off by the new leadership.
We've got nearly 1,700 people watching. Let's try and get to 2,000 while we're still live. So you know what to do. Share the show link and tweet on the hashtag #TiskiSour. Across the world, taking the knee has become the symbol of the Black Lives Matter movement. Since the murder of George Floyd 4 weeks ago, protesters, politicians, and even police have got down on one knee to express their solidarity with Black people suffering from police violence. On Thursday, Britain's Foreign Secretary Dominic Raab was asked if he would do the same. Let's take a look at what he said.
Just after watching the football last night, would you take a knee if you were asked to?
Do you know what? I understand this sense of frustration and restlessness which is driving the Black Lives Matters movement. I've got to say, on this taking the knee thing, which I don't know, maybe it's got a broader history, but seems to be taken from the Game of Thrones, feels to me like a symbol of subjugation and subordination rather than one of liberation and emancipation. But I understand people feel differently about it, so it's a matter of personal choice.
So would you or wouldn't you do it?
Take the knee for 2 people, the Queen and the Missus, when I asked her to marry me.
No, I mean, that is just, I mean, the obvious thing to say there is that is so fucking stupid. I mean, it did not come from the Game of Thrones. I don't know where he got that idea from, because I haven't really seen that meme around on the internet. It just seems like he has, well, either one option is he has no curiosity whatsoever about the Black Lives Matter movement, and he just said the first thing that came into his head. The other option, which is something we're going to, talk about later, is, was this intentional? Is there something deeper going on here? But first of all, let's quickly go through why people are taking the knee. So taking the knee doesn't come from the HBO series Game of Thrones. It comes from American football star Colin Kaepernick. So in 2016, he refused to stand for the national anthem. And get up a quote from him here. "I am not going to stand up to show pride in a flag for a country that oppresses Black people and people of color." So his initial protest had been to remain seated. But after speaking to a fellow or a former NFL player and former veteran, he decided that it would seem more respectful, instead of just staying seated, to take a knee. And of that action, so Eric Reed, who's Kaepernick's former teammate, this is a quote from him. It's quite a nice one. So he says, we chose to kneel because it's a respectful gesture. I remember thinking our posture was like a flag flown at half-mast to mark a tragedy." So no one mentioned Game of Thrones. What Dominic Raab said was ill-informed, stupid, and offensive. Aaron, my question to you, though, was it an accident? Or, I mean, am I being overly tinfoil hat conspiratorial to think that Dominic Raab is sort of sending out a signal to racist voters, really, that he doesn't care about the Black Lives Matter movement? He's willing to basically openly mock the Black Lives Matter movement, but he's doing so in a way which has plausible deniability, because he can just claim ignorance. He says, I didn't mean to troll Britain's Black communities, which is politically unacceptable to do in an open way. But is he doing it in a subtle way? Do you think that's what's going on here? Or do you think it was just a slip up and he hasn't thought that much about the issue?
I think they're just having a laugh. I do think a lot of this comes down to having a laugh. I think the left does get trolled a lot. One was about, Farage will be, the ambassador to the United States. People just put these things out there, and it's just to wind the left up. And I'm sure if the left was in charge, we would do the same thing. We would say that Jeremy Corbyn is about to announce the creation of a new a new city, a new model city in Berkshire. It's going to be named Corbyn Grad. You know, it'll be fully renewable energy, etc. 250,000 people, and we're going to turn, you know, some of the home counties into a giant, you know, reservoir for hydroelectric energy. You know, something like that. You just say it. It's kind of funny. I think I don't know if it was calculated. I certainly don't think he takes the issue seriously. I think that's what this reflects. I think he probably, you know, the first thing that came to mind is what he said. What's interesting actually is the knee thing with Kaepernick, because like you say, initially with Kaepernick, he just wasn't getting up for the national anthem. He was just sitting down, and the whole knee thing was him. I believe it was him engaging with a veteran, ironically. Yep. And he said, "Well, look, you take the knee when you see a comrade at their graveside. So if you're talking about people who've not been treated well by the US state in a respectful way, I think that's a great thing to do." And yet, you know, the US right misrepresented him completely, as has Dominic Raab here. So was it intentional? I don't know. But I do think that, you know, they don't feel like they have to take these things seriously, and that not taking it seriously plays to their base. I mean, Julia Hartley Brewer's been saying, well, that got 4 million views, that clip. Yeah, it's because he's making an idiot out of himself. But we're talking about it. So, you know, it couldn't have gone that badly wrong.
Well, it's not just, I think it's gone well for him. But what I'm saying is that I think it is quite sinister that they're willing to do that, because they are publicly saying, you know, like, oh, we respect the Black Lives Matter movement and the demands they're making. But at the same time, they're sort of doing a nudge, nudge, wink, wink, sort of completely belittling that movement. I mean, I think you can say a similar thing potentially. Again, I don't know. I can't read Matt Hancock's mind, but I do think it has a similar narrative. There's a thread in common of Matt Hancock sort of getting Marcus Rashford's name wrong.
Do you think?
You know, an effect of that was to belittle him. Basically, it's to say, look, yeah, we've changed our policy, but obviously I don't care about this young black footballer. He means nothing to me. I mean, I think that's completely plausible. That's the signal he was giving. It's plausible.
I don't think Matt Hancock's that nasty a person. I mean, plausibly, but I think he probably was thinking of Daniel Sturridge, because obviously it's early in the morning. He's a Tory, and sort of two vaguely similar looking black guys, easily mixed up on planet Tory. I think that's what happened. I think he just got confused with maybe Daniel Sturridge and Marcus Rashford. I mean, I could be wrong. That was more of a foot in mouth moment. Whereas I think with Raab, I think you're right. I think this could be a lot more sinister.
What do you think about the Trump? There's a very similar debate going on in the United States at the moment. So Trump announced his first campaign rally on Juneteenth, which is a day which in America is used to commemorate the ending of slavery. It was when a statement was read out by Abraham Lincoln in Texas, and slaves were freed on that day. And Donald Trump has decided, or had decided, to hold a rally on that day in Tulsa, where there was also a very famous massacre of black people. So this was seen as trolling America's African-American community, and also as a signal to racist white voters. Donald Trump said, "Oh, I didn't know, honest mistake." Yeah. And again, there's people having this exact same conversation, which is that we can't read his mind. We don't know. There is genuine plausible deniability. There'll never be a smoking gun, but he has sent a signal to racist white voters whilst being able to say, "Oh, no, that's not what I was doing."
Yeah, and half his brand is being victimized by the liberal media. That's half his brand, and that's what it allows him to do. And there wasn't just that. There was also, you know, we want to make Antifa a criminal organization, and he was sharing this. The red star was a thumb, this upside down red star, and the upside down red star was a
upside down red triangle.
Sorry, yeah, the star was the one that was given to Jewish political prisoners, which was the red triangle plus the yellow sort of background. Yeah, upside down red triangle for political prisoners that went to concentration camps. You know, from Dachau in 1933 onwards. So. And he goes, "Sorry, I didn't know it was the intern or something." And I agree with you. It's signaling to a certain part of the electorate, I'm on your side. But then I think the secondary effect is to quote unquote trigger the liberal media, because what seem, because most people have no idea, right? Most people have no idea what these things are meant to represent, whether or not they're true. And what Trump thrives on is not talking about the issues and superficiality. And that's what this then catalyzes. Doesn't mean you shouldn't call it out. Right? It doesn't mean, if you call this, doesn't mean we should be okay with Donald Trump sharing, you know, proto-Nazi symbolism in regards to the criminalization of protest. But that's probably the intention.
It's not all you should do. We're going to look at one more attempt at distraction. Someone else who likes to draw attention from the issues that, you know, their weaknesses by talking about, well, I mean, stupid cultural stuff is not quite the right way to talk about that Trump campaign rally, but I think it is about this next story. And this is about the RFU, so the Rugby Football Union, suggesting they are going to reassess or at least put out some educational materials. It's quite ambiguous. Basically, I only learned this morning that people at rugby sing "Swing Low, Sweet Chariot." Apparently, it's the big song that people sing at England matches. And now the governing body of rugby football have put out this statement to say they are reassessing it in light of the Black Lives Matter protests. Let's get up their statement. So they say, the RFU has stated we need to do more to achieve diversity and we are determined to accelerate change and grow awareness. The Swing Low, Sweet Chariot song has been part of the culture of rugby and is sung by many who have no awareness of its origins or sensitivities. We are reviewing its historical context and our role in educating fans to make informed decisions. Now, that statement to me seems perfectly reasonable. I was seeing the pictures, they've got kind of crass branding all over the stadium that's Swing Low, Sweet Chariot. And they're saying, given that this was a song about slavery, quite a grim topic, then maybe we should, reflect that in how we do this branding. So that could be something just like, I thought it'd be nice, put an essay in the program or something to sort of say, this song we all sing, let's remember what it actually means and where it comes from, instead of singing it in ignorance. But obviously, the right-wing newspapers and the Conservatives have jumped on this as another instance of people trying to ban the things we love. So let's now look at Boris Johnson, who, he should be a busy guy, but he had enough time to make a big comment on this non-story. Let's take a look.
All these issues that people are now raising to do with statues and songs and so on, I can see why they're very emotive. I understand that. But what I want to focus on is the substance of the issue. And yes, of course, I see that Black Lives Matter, and we're going to address all the issues that we can in society. I want to make sure that this is a society where people can advance on their merits, achieve fantastic things, and don't face prejudice or discrimination. As for Swing Low, Sweet Chariot, nobody, as far as I understand it, seems to know the words. Whenever I go to a rugby match, before we start complaining about Swing Low, Sweet Chariot, I'd like to know what the rest of the words are. They go Swing Low, Sweet Chariot, coming for to carry me home, and then they all sort of it all dies out. How does it go on? That's my objection. That's my question. I certainly don't think there should be any sort of prohibition on singing that song. My curiosity is why don't people seem to know the rest of it? I'd love to hear the rest of it. How does it go on?
No one was proposing a prohibition on that song. See, this is how this happened. So then there was loads of headlines after he said that this afternoon. Headlines even on The Guardian, like all of the newspapers and the BBC, saying Boris Johnson opposes a ban on the song Swing Low, Sweet Chariot. No one had proposed a ban on the song Swing Low, Sweet Chariot. And I mean, it's smart, but it's also too easy. I mean, it is another example of the Tories playing politics on easy mode, isn't it, Aaron?
Yeah, I mean, you could just kind of come up with the most outrageous thing. Imagine if you're a Tory sort of communications advisor, and you'd call up somebody and you'd say, we're not going to have white shirts for the England national team anymore because there's kind of racist overtones there. We kind of think that's a thing. And then you get sort of Dominic Raab to go in the media, go, look, where does this end? And you can just contrive and make it a thing. And journalists, particularly at the BBC, particularly at leading outlets, have a responsibility here to not play that game, right? To not be part of what is effectively psychological warfare, in a very politically astute way, may I add, by the Conservatives, by the right, to basically turn really important issues around racialized police violence, around how the wealthier countries treat poorer countries, etc. Well, these things are a legacy of the world we inherited, slavery, and so on, and the oppression of people of color, particularly black people, over centuries. But what they do is they make it an incredibly kind of facile debate through, like I say, waging with psychological warfare. The BBC should not be enabling this. I saw Trevor Phillips saying, "Oh, now they're going to ban this." No, they're not going to ban that. That's not what's being said. Nobody has demanded it. Certainly nobody's been on the streets crying for it. If you go to Black Lives Matter demonstrations, not one single person has said, we need to ban and prohibit the singing of Swing Low, Sweet Chariot. The fact that Trevor Phillips has just latched onto it, said that in such a way as to, I think, be incendiary and to actually make the debate less informed, less politically expedient. and actually undermining it. I think that's why Trevor Phillips should in no way be taken seriously when it comes to dealing with really significant issues of structural racism. People say, well, he's black, of course he should. No, of course he couldn't. Iranians can be racist. Chinese people can be racist. Anybody can be racist, and certainly they can certainly argue really superficial, meaningless, platitudinous arguments. Actually, when real intelligence is needed, like here, okay, there may be an issue around it. I think you've dealt with it very intelligently, Michael. There may be an issue. Let's err on the side of caution. Okay, a bit like with the 40 Towers episode, which was briefly taken offline by UK TV. Why does every minor thing have to become like the collapse of civilization? Is it an outgrowth of the technologies we're using on social media? Is it an outgrowth of the kind of collapse of the political center? Probably a bit of both.
We got a comment on the hashtag Tisky Sour. Dominic, this is from Rich Williamson. Dominic Raab admitted he did not fully appreciate the importance of the Dover-Calais crossing for UK trade. That's what you're dealing with. I don't think he is a complete idiot, though. I mean, I think he's, he has got a modicum of intelligence, even if he says some dumb shit all the time. Right, we're going to go through it was a comment, not a tweet, apparently. We are going to go through the coronavirus latest. And, well, I suppose it's good news. Although the COVID alert levels don't seem to mean much, given they were introduced as what would be the signal for us to loosen the lockdown, and we did it anyway. But to remind you, let's get them up. So these are the COVID alert levels, which Boris Johnson introduced to much fanfare at the beginning of last month when he spoke then. We were on level 4, which meant a COVID-19 epidemic is in general circulation. Transmission is high or rising exponentially. And what he said back then is we would start to loosen the lockdown when we move down to level 3, at which point a COVID-19 epidemic is in general circulation, but transmission isn't high and it's definitely not rising exponentially. So it seemed like this was meaningless because we changed policy even though we hadn't gone down a level. But today, at last, we have moved down to level 3. Let's get up a quote from the statement from the chief medical officers. They say there has been a steady decrease in cases we have seen in all 4 nations, and this continues. It does not mean the pandemic is over. The virus is still in general circulation and localized outbreaks are likely to occur. So that was the UK government chief medical officers. There was also some other good news this week. So results for a trial into the existing drug dexamethasone came back showing it to significantly reduce mortality in coronavirus patients. So for patients on ventilators, it can cut the risk of death from 40% to 28%. For patients needing oxygen, it can cut the risk of death from 25% to 20%. So this is the first really significant therapeutic that has been found to decrease mortality amongst COVID patients. And happily, it is a drug which is already, very widespread, very cheap. It's a steroid drug that's often used to treat asthma and conditions like that. However, whilst this week the COVID crisis looks slightly more positive than it did 7 days ago, we are, as ever, learning new information about the depths of the tragedy that was the UK government's initial response and the human cost of that. And this is referring to a Guardian story today. So new accusations centre on their downplaying deaths at the peak of the crisis. So when the UK was in its peak, the highest daily death toll announced by the government was 980. It never reached 4 figures. They never said on any day that more than 1,000 people had died. However, looking at all the data of all the deaths recorded as COVID-19 in all settings, so that's in hospitals, at homes, or in care homes, the Guardian have shown that on 22 consecutive days, more than 1,000 people died from the virus. I think we can get up this graph here with the highest death toll on the 8th of April when 1,445 people died. Now, you can remember how much pressure the government were under when the numbers were in the 800s, the 900s, etc., etc. But can you imagine if they'd gone up there for 22 days in a row and every one of those days announced a death toll which was higher than 1,000, right? I mean, again, it's not necessarily a conspiracy, but it sure was helpful for them that the true extent of the death toll did not come out until a lot later. Aaron, your thoughts on sort of these latest coronavirus developments in terms of us, going down an alert level? It does seem like the loosening of the lockdown has not led to, a second spike yet. And also some therapeutics coming out that seem to suggest that if we were to have, a proper second spike, say next winter, there will be, many more tools enabling us to deal with it than there was the last time around.
Yeah, I mean, in regards to the, is it a steroid treatment?
Yeah.
I mean, that's great. It's in no way equivalent to a vaccine. This is still a very fatal illness. I think basically it kind of means that fatality rates would fall by between a third and a half, I think.
For people on so for people on ventilators, it falls by a third. Overall, it won't be a third. The figure I've seen thrown around is that it could have saved 5,000 lives.
Okay.
And given we've had 60,000 deaths, that's a lot less than a third, isn't it?
Okay.
So I suppose what's that? 1 in 8 or something like that. I should never do maths live.
1 in 12. But yeah, I mean,
12,
I guess we don't know the extent to which people, particularly in elderly care homes, were more effective. And yeah, in terms of the people that have died so far, would that be a sort of representative sample of a much broader epidemic? It increasingly sounds like actually the people who should have been sort of protected the most were actually being exposed to it probably more than anybody else, even after lockdown had happened, which is just crazy. Yeah, these are good stories, but I can't help but thinking, it just seems a bit strange that we're ending lockdown so quickly. But then again, I think there's something to be said about the fact that Vietnam have had no deaths. All these relatively poorer countries in Central and Eastern Europe have had very few fatalities. It may be that wearing a face mask and gloves, it may be that they actually, just these very simple measures reduce rates of transmission really significantly. Don't get rid of it, but really significantly. And which sort of says, well, why didn't we do that stuff sooner? I guess we'll know. Again, if that is the case, and if that does mean we have a massive reduction in transmission and fatalities, and again, the government has a real case to answer for.
I think one reason, and we're going to get onto this in our next story, potentially, that we haven't seen a second spike as the lockdown loosens. I think, as you say, the real sort of huge death tolls were when the virus became widespread without any behavioural change, without any policy change. So in hotspots like London and Lombardy and New York, Madrid, but also where weather is hotter. It doesn't seem to hit quite so hard. So I think the fact that the temperature's been up over the last couple of weeks has probably helped. We've got a super chat from Stephen Morris with 50 quid. Very kind. Thank you for that. I disagree with Michael. Dominic Raab is an extreme right-wing ideologue and an ill-informed numpty, not a nice man. Keep up the great work. What bit do you disagree with? I think I'm not sure I suggested he was anything other than an extreme right-wing ideologue and an ill-informed numpty. I certainly didn't suggest he was a nice man, but maybe you can clarify in the comments and I'll get Fox to bring it up. Next story. Before we go to that, though, if you are watching this, if you're enjoying the show, make sure you hit that subscribe button. We want to get to 100,000 subscribers by the end of the summer. British business magnate and host of The Apprentice, Lord Alan Sugar, caused controversy this week when he spoke to Jeremy Vine with his thoughts about coronavirus lockdowns. Let's take a look.
Look, I'm not a doctor and I don't want to be giving medical advice and all that stuff. The only thing I can say is that I've been here in Florida for 6 months. And so I've lived through the crisis, the shortage of ventilators, the no masks available, the no body wear available, the hospital beds being full up, blah, 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 blah. And I've now seen the transition of restaurants opening, tennis courts, for example, opening, golf clubs opening, restaurants opening 50% capacity. Shops have been open all of the time, quite honestly. And this has been going on now for 6 weeks. And so I just logically say, well, hold on, 6 weeks out, we've come out of this so-called lockdown. Who's dead? I'm not. I'm still alive. My wife, thank God, is still alive. So is everybody else I know. No one else has caught anything. So I suppose it's a bit of a clue there that says that maybe we've reached a peak, and maybe it's time for us to follow the example of America, or indeed France, that have opened up, or indeed Spain. I think Prime Minister Johnson, I'm unfortunately had the problem himself, and I think he's been a little bit too cautious, if you ask me, just slightly.
Who's dead? 120,000 people in the United States are dead, Alan Sugar. And that's probably a severe underestimate, because that's that's confirmed cases. As we know, excess deaths is probably going to be much higher. So you standing there and saying you're not dead, your wife's not dead, and no one you know is dead is not a particularly good medical argument to encourage a loosening of the lockdown.
I mean, it's the complete opposite of rationality. You could say this for anything. You could say this for anything. Oh, as a society, we have people that speak multiple languages. Well, I can't. I can only speak one language. Don't believe you. Oh,
we have people. My wife. My wife can only speak one language. Everyone I know can only speak.
Yeah. We have people that can build rockets that go to space and launch satellites, and that's how we use mobile phones. Well, I can't. I don't believe you that they exist. Not only is this guy extraordinarily rich, I think he borders on billionaire, increasingly from real estate. He's a rentier. He's not using his brain here. Surprise, surprise. He's also an unelected, lifelong politician. He's a legislator in the House of Lords. He's paid by all of us to not be elected and to make decisions which affect the entire country. And yet he's incredibly stupid. It's almost like he's doing this on purpose. Oh yeah, you're a really incredibly wealthy guy with a massive villa in Florida, and you haven't got coronavirus. I wonder why. I hope he doesn't get it. I hope that he stays safe. But like you say, 120,000 people have died in the US, 60,000 here. Just because you haven't got, you've never had the Black Death. It doesn't mean it didn't exist. It killed 30% of Europe in the 14th century. It's just a really daft thing. If you never had cancer, then cancer doesn't exist. I mean, how far do we want to take Alan Sugar's logic? He was made a lord by Gordon Brown. It tells you how bad Labour were doing. What kind of a political party makes? Even if I was like far right reaction, I'd be like, wow, like really? Are you this daft to make such an idiot, such a bum, a lifelong unelected legislator? Really? You can pick anybody and you pick Alan Sugar?
Hard to disagree. Florida is an interesting test case, though, so I do want to go through, a bit about, because, I mean, one thing Alan Sugar, well, it's not quite what he said, but one thing he would be right about is that less people have died in Florida than in other places, and less people than was expected. So because there was the governor of Florida had a fairly laissez-faire sort of reaction to coronavirus, still obviously massive behavioral change and lockdowns going on. It wasn't just life as normal, but it wasn't as strict as elsewhere. And they've only had 3,000 deaths in the state, or at least official deaths. Probably the death toll is higher. And that compares to New York State's 30,000. So you can see significantly less. New York ended up having a much stricter lockdown than Florida did. But there are, the obvious explanation for this is it's really hot in Florida. The weather's great. And this is not just me doing, folk science. There is some evidence here that this matters. So in explaining where COVID outbreaks have and haven't happened, researchers at the University of Maryland found that significant outbreaks only tend to happen where average temperatures are between 5 and 11 degrees Celsius. And there's an interesting map we can get up here, which is used in the paper. And then this was reprinted in the Telegraph. And it's showing you there all of those areas of the world where between March and April 2019, where COVID was sort of most rampant, when policies hadn't yet been implemented, lockdowns, etc., to stop its spread. You can see in those green areas, that's where COVID was spreading very fast, including up actually on the west coast of Latin America, because there are places in Ecuador where lots of people have died, big death tolls there.
I mean, how does that explain Brazil?
Brazil, actually, the death toll hasn't been that huge. I think compared to how shockingly awful the policy has been, you haven't seen an outbreak on the scale of North America or Europe whatsoever.
Well, they had almost 1,000 people dying a day at one point.
Yeah, but if you've got policy which is that appalling, then if that had happened in Northern Europe, for example, you would have seen way more deaths than what you're currently seeing in Brazil. Anyway, the point I wanted to make to this map is that if you look at where Florida is, where Alan Sugar is, that's right in the middle of that red zone where it's hot and dry enough for you not to have a massive outbreak. He's saying what's going on in Florida should be a reason to shift policy in Britain, which is right in the middle of the cold, dry area where coronavirus spreads most quickly. I mean, in terms of, Brazil, it was. I mean, if you look at the president they've had, you could not have a more incompetent response to coronavirus.
I'm not so sure about this argument.
They've still had way less deaths than the United States.
Well, like MERS, there's 3 coronaviruses. One is MERS, and that's big in the Arabian Peninsula, which isn't.
Well, when you say big, how much community transmission was there? Because the issue is community.
Well, not much. It's, Saudi Arabia has basically 3 urban centres. I mean, most of it's kind of Bedouin or
but there was hardly any community transmission because not many people got it. The idea of having.
But that's the only part of the planet it exists. MERS.
Yeah, because it died out. So I don't think these viruses often occur where you have wild animals that come into contact with people or whatever, but they will spread where you have conditions for widespread community transmission. And it seems that the places where widespread community transmission have happened have been in colder climates. That's what this research says, and it also kind of makes sense, anecdotally from looking at it. That's partly because sunlight and heat can kill the virus potentially, not in the way that, don't inject it in your veins like what Donald Trump is suggesting, but also that in colder climates you spend more time inside,
right,
sort of cramped up together, breathing the same air. I think that people looking at lots of people on the beach and saying that means we're going to have a second peak. I think that was probably always mistaken because that's outside, it's sunny, etc., etc. And I think that is kind of borne out in the data. So don't look at what's going on in Florida and think that's a reason for us to change policies.
Hey, but if we get a massive spike in like 2 weeks, do we have to delete this show? If the government says we have a second spike and it's all down to people rushing to Durdle Door in Dorset and Blackpool Beach and Southend.
Well, it depends what the second spike looks like, actually. So let's get up my next graphic. So this is, even though Florida, has, according to the University of Maryland, the climatic conditions that would put it in good stead to resist a rise in coronavirus cases, and has done so far. It has avoided them so far. Florida is seeing record new cases of coronavirus, record for that state, not record for any state. Presumably there were many more confirmed cases in New York at one point in time, or potentially unconfirmed because of the level of testing. But you can see that, the relaxing of the lockdown in Florida is having costs, but whether or not we'll see the kind of exponential outbreak that we saw in places like New York or Madrid, I mean, I don't think is particularly likely. I could be completely wrong. Maybe we will have to delete this episode in free.
Because you called so much right. I'm thinking Walker's coronavirus run, maybe it could be coming to an end. He's called Michael Walker since February. I remember the first time we even talked about coronavirus in Novara Media, it was you. You were talking about, I really think we should cover this coronavirus thing. This was in like mid-February. And I was like, because it started to impact some of the sort of, remember? The FTSE was playing games. And I said, no, look, this is probably like the flash crash. Let's see. Maybe it's going to be like SARS or, there's been so many of these things. This is the third coronavirus this millennium. Ebola, it was a 50% fatality rate. It's been controlled. But it was really, really bad. Michael Walker called it. So maybe this might be your run coming to an end. We'll know in a couple of weeks.
Fox is saying it doesn't mean hot weather doesn't mean there can't be outbreaks in hot countries. Yeah, it doesn't mean there can't be outbreaks in hot countries, but the level of community transmission means that it doesn't seem like you're going to have the same kind of disastrous scenes
significant
that you had
variable,
in Northern
right?
Europe and North America. Yeah.
Michael Walker is he not saying you can't get it if you're in this, it's hot?
Yeah, you can get it, but it's just it doesn't seem to erupt in the same way that it erupts in colder places. So, for example, South Korea, there was an outbreak, but it was an outbreak that was quite closely associated with lots of people being in a church, big space, lots of etc. Anyway, we're going to move on to our next story in one moment. First of all, if you want to support Novara Media, please go to novaramedia.com/support and donate the equivalent of 1 hour's wage a month. We really appreciate it because we want to grow. Our final story of the night broke just before we went live. Reality TV show The Apprentice boosted the careers of Donald Trump and Alan Sugar, the character we just spoke about. It has also unforgivably, I think both of those are quite unforgivable, but this one is just as ridiculous. They introduced the world to the attention-seeking crypto-fascist Katie Hopkins. Now, today, after long-standing campaigns by anti-hate groups, Hopkins was permanently banned from Twitter, losing her platform to broadcast her bullshit to her 1.1 million Twitter followers, or what used to be her 1.1 million Twitter followers, which she does not have them anymore. We'll go into some details about her career in a moment. First of all, Aaron, your instant take: is this something we should be celebrating, or are you into that crowd where we shouldn't celebrate when big, American unaccountable private firms are, censoring what goes out on their platforms?
It's a tough one. I mean, we're of a mind on this, I think, Michael. Which, generally speaking, we don't think it should be a sort of ad hoc thing by private businesses, because then these are such critical parts of freedom of speech and so on, right to publication, freedom of association, and so on. Facebook and Twitter. If you're not on Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube, you're not participating in the 21st century conversation. Yeah, and so it shouldn't be taken lightly. On the other hand, she's a white supremacist. I mean, I don't say that lightly. She's quite open about it. She will quite openly say, I think white people are better than brown and black people. She'll say that. And she's often, I think, incited hatred. And again, I don't say that. I think she's literally incited specific issues. Tommy Robinson did something similar with that young Syrian boy, I believe, when he shared a video, and he genuinely put that young man in danger. So I think there's a pretty good case, even if you are something of a free speech fundamentalist. I'm not a fundamentalist. I think incitement clearly shouldn't be given a platform. But even if you really are on the side of caution with taking people's right to publish and freedom of speech away from them on these platforms, even then, I think this is pretty much an open and shut case. Might disagree.
Yeah, I mean, I basically agree with that. I mean, also, it's not just a debate about free speech, because Katie Hopkins is also she was promoted, given a huge platform for a very long time by many of Britain's most prominent media outlets. Let's look at a few of, the grimmest examples of this. So between 2013 and 2015, Hopkins had a regular column in The Sun. She ended up being condemned by the UN's human rights chief after arguing that migrant boats carrying Syrian refugees should be stopped by gunships. Let's look at how she defended this position in that particular column. So she said, "No, I don't care. Show me pictures of coffins, show me bodies floating in water, play violins, and show me skinny people looking sad. I don't care." She goes on, "Make no mistake, these migrants are like cockroaches. They might look a bit Bob Geldof's Ethiopia circa 1984, but they are built to survive a nuclear bomb. They are survivors." Now, that was published in Britain's highest-selling newspaper in 2015. Not 1975, not 1980, in 2015, calling migrants cockroaches. And also the context there is, almost 4,000 people died trying to cross the Mediterranean that year, escaping a civil war. I also want to just get up before getting your comment on this, the tweet from The Sun to promote this piece, because it just looks so fascist. Can we get this up? Sun columnist Katie Hopkins says, "You may as well set up a Libya to Italy P&O ferry. Show me bodies floating in the water, play violins, and show me skinny people looking sad. I still don't care." And then she is looking at you with her blonde hair and her blue eyes, smiling. It's just gives me the absolute creeps. She left The Sun that year, but to go straight to the Mail Online, which at that point in time was Britain's most widely read online newspaper, and went on to work for LBC. So we spoke last week about them finally firing Farage after platforming his hate for a really long time, or way too long than they should have done. And she had the opportunity to do that every Sunday morning for over a year on LBC. She ended up losing that gig when, after the Manchester Arena bombing, she tweeted, and get this up, 22 dead, number rising, Schofield, don't you even dare, do not be part of the problem, we need a final solution, Manchester. She was presumably tweeting Philip Schofield. But that invocation of a final solution obviously provokes comparisons with the Nazis. Incredibly grim, disgusting. Aaron, do you think that Katie Hopkins could say those things that she said in The Sun on LBC now? Do you think we've kind of moved on a little bit as a society over those past 5 years, or do we see similar language to that in The Sun still?
Really great question.
Still?
Really great question. Her editor at the time at The Sun was a gentleman called Stig Abel, or the executive editor. They had to have a very strange system after 2011 and Leveson. But Stig Abel was basically the top guy. Stig Abel now is kind of fronting the Times Radio, which is going to be a competitor to Radio 4. He has a program on BBC Radio. He's increasingly sort of prominent on BBC Radio. He'll do paper reviews, and I believe he's editor, or he was editor. I don't know if that's carrying on now. The Times literary supplement. Very respectable voice. Moderate, urbane, metropolitan voice. Went to a lovely, expensive private school. And he was the person who okayed those words. So I think, she might be out of the picture, but many people who enabled her, platformed her, pushed her forward, made her possible, okayed her, said it was fine, said this was a perfectly legitimate point of view in a democratic society. Those people are all still with us. The person that commissioned the LBC show, Stig Abel, the person that got her into Mail Online, questionable. Really questionable. She has gone. Tommy Robinson increasingly isn't playing a significant sort of role in the public conversation. But the people that elevated them, the people that said those points of view were legitimate, they're still around. And they're still very much shaping the nature of the political conversation in media, in policy, in politics to this day. Could she have said that now? No, I don't think she could have. I do think we've moved on. But the fact those people behind the scenes are still there, I mean, that really, I think, provides food for thought.
I think that's a really important note to end on. And I think that's really where the eye should be directed, not so much at the extreme cases on Twitter, but the people who allow this to flourish in the mainstream media that we consume every day. Thank you, everyone, for your super chats tonight. If you want to support us directly, then do please go to novaramedia.com/support and donate the equivalent of 1 hour's wage a month. We appreciate it so much. We'll be back on Monday night, so make sure you hit subscribe to never miss a show. Have a great weekend. You've been watching Tysky Sour on Novara Media. Good night.